All right, everyone, we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are here to talk about the gender gap in caregiving. My name is Kristen Mackey. I'm the Community Relations and Outreach Program Manager for WA Cares Fund at DSHS. And I have a great panel with me here today to speak about their experience with this topic. We'll go through each of our panelists for you to provide a brief introduction. Let's start with you, Jess.
Hi everyone, my name is Jess Gomez and I work at SEIU 775, specifically on our WA Cares outreach program. It's good to be with you today.
Thank you so much. And Maggie, we'll go to you next.
Hey everyone, my name is Maggie Humphreys, she, her pronouns. I'm with Moms Rising. We're a local and national grassroots organization organizing with moms, parents, and caregivers across the state to pass policies that support families like WA Cares and others.
All right, and Linnell.
Linnell Hott, volunteer president for the League of Women Voters of Washington. The League has national, state, and local leagues. Thanks for the invitation.
All right, thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to have just a brief intro to talk about why we're here, and then we will have some remarks from each of our panelists, including we'll start off with a short overview of WA Cares Fund, and then we will open it up for discussion and audience Q&A. For those of you who have joined us on a computer, you are welcome to go ahead and start submitting questions for our panel through the Q&A function, and then we will get to them when we reach the discussion section of the agenda. So to start, we just want to touch on the issue why we're here today. Some of our panelists, like me for WA Cares Fund, will be talking specifically about elder care, and some will be speaking more broadly about multiple types of care responsibilities. But when we look specifically at elder care, unpaid caregiving accounts for 85% of all elder care in the United States. And not only are 61% of caregivers women, but women are also more likely than men to be the primary caregiver and more likely to be caring for multiple adults. When we look at the value of that care, $148 to $188 billion a year is the annual value of that informal care being provided by women. So to start, we'll touch on what long-term care is. So what long-term care is help with activities of daily living like bathing, eating, dressing, and taking medication. So when we look at formal long-term care, that can be in a facility like a nursing home or an adult family home, or it can take place in your own home from a professional caregiver. But the majority of this type of care is informal. So that's unpaid care from a family member, a friend, or a neighbor. And 70% of us will need long-term care at some point in our lives, but long-term care is very expensive. It costs about $33,000 a year for 20 hours of home care per week, which is the average that's needed by current Medicaid long-term care clients, and is more expensive than that if you're looking at care in other types of facilities. And it's also important to note that the family caregiving model is not free either. It comes with financial repercussions for the folks who are providing the care, career repercussions as well, and folks who provide family caregiving are often spending as much as 25% of their own income on caregiving related expenses. What long-term care is not is medical care, which means that it's not covered by health insurance or Medicare, and it's not covered by Medicaid until your savings are exhausted. All of that taken together means that it's not affordable for most of us. Washington seniors' median household income is $56,000 a year, and most have no 401k or pension income. The good news is that WA Cares Fund can help. WA Cares is a universal long-term care program enacted in Washington state. It's an earned benefit where each worker in Washington contributes for a certain number of years to qualify for benefits. It's self-funded by those worker contributions, but you only pay in while you're working. And in WA Cares Fund, everyone is covered at the same rate, regardless of pre-existing conditions and regardless of gender, unlike private long-term care insurance where women often pay significantly more. Walk Cares Fund reduces the need to raise taxes to pay for Medicaid long-term care costs as our population ages, and overall is a more efficient and effective way to pay for long-term care by making affordable contributions across our careers. Contributions to the program will begin in July 2023, and benefits will become available in 2026. And premiums from Walk Cares go into a dedicated trust fund that is used only for this program. There are a few groups that are not included, but the vast majority of workers in Washington will pay in. Federal employees are not included in Walk Cares, and employees of tribes are only included if the tribal employer has opted in. Folks who are self-employed are able to opt in as well. And then there are certain groups of workers that can apply for an exemption. That includes workers who live out of state, temporary workers with a non-immigrant visa, spouses of active duty military members, and veterans with a service-connected disability rating of 70% or greater. There was also an insurance, private long-term care insurance exemption that was available for folks who had private long-term care insurance before November 2021. And when we look at this contribution percentage, it is helpful sometimes for folks to see what that looks like across a career. So the typical Washington income is just about at the level in green there in the middle. And you can see that $290 a year in contributions totals out at about $8,700 over 30 years. And that is really important to us to keep contributions affordable, especially when we look at populations that are already experiencing disproportionate impacts of caregiving responsibilities. And everyone who is contributing to Walk Cares Fund more than 500 hours per year is earning benefits. That's about 10 hours per week, so that includes folks who are working part-time. And by contributing for a certain number of years, you qualify for the $36,500 benefit. There are a few ways that you can qualify. First off is early access to the full benefit. And this is designed to ensure that workers who need care either while they're still working or soon after they stop working are able to get access to the full benefit, even if they haven't worked for the full 10 years. So anyone who has contributed at least 3 of the last 6 years at the time that they need care is eligible for early access. Then lifetime access to the full benefit. Anyone who contributes to Walk Cares Fund for a total of 10 years without a break of 5 or more consecutive years earns access to the benefit that they can use at any point in their life. Again, you only contribute to Walk Cares Fund while you are still working. And then finally, we have a new path that was added in legislative session this year, and that is specifically for near retirees. So for folks who were born before 1968, you can earn 10% of the benefit amount for each year that you work. So someone who works for 3 years and contributes to Walk Cares Fund during that time has earned 30% of the full benefit amount. And that is also a lifetime access. So they will be able to access that benefit at any point that they need it. And finally, Walk Cares is designed to help people age in place in their homes as long as possible. That's what almost all of us want to do, and what most of us are able to do if we have the right supports in place. So the benefit is flexible. You can use this budget of $36,500 for any combination of services and supports. So you could use that for professional care at home or in a facility. If you'd rather train and pay a family caregiver or a friend to provide care, you can do that. You can also use that money to provide support and respite care for a family caregiver, or you can use the money to do something like make an evaluation and make environmental modifications to your home. You can buy adaptive equipment and technology that you need, get meals delivered to you at home, or get help with transportation. So really, Walk Cares is structured to support family caregivers, and by that we mean anyone that you consider to be a loved one or part of your family, and to be something that you're able to choose what works best for you and for the people that you love. So let's go ahead and go to each of our panelists to share a little bit about their work. We are going to start, Jess, with you.
Everyone, thank you, Kristen. As I introduced myself earlier, I'm Jess Gomez and I'm with SEIU 775. 775 is a union of long-term care providers, the majority of which are women. We have about 45,000 members here in Washington state, and this includes individual providers who are paid by the state, often to care for a loved one or family member, and people who work for home care agencies or nursing facilities. There are two main topics that I want to introduce today: women as long-term caregivers and women as long-term care recipients, or as those receiving the care. So in terms of women as long-term care providers, unfortunately, we all know that caregiving, whether it be for children or for the elderly or disabled, has long been seen as women's work. And like much of women's work, it remains largely unpaid. The good news is that Washington state is a national leader in long-term care, in part because our Medicaid program includes paid family caregiving, bringing thousands of unpaid women caregivers into the workforce, and WACARES will bring in even more. 2 out of 3 caregivers in the United States are women. And many of these women are part of the sandwich generation, meaning they're also often taking care of children and aging adults or someone who's disabled in their family while continuing to try to work and participate in their communities. Disproportionately, women make the difficult decision to leave the workforce earlier than they plan to care for an aging parent. And with that choice, they lose their ability to save for their future and might even see a trimmed Social Security check as a result. On average, a person who leaves the workforce to care for a loved one loses about $300,000 in income over the course of a lifetime. And women who leave their jobs to provide care to a loved one are less likely to return to work than their male counterparts. Another interesting fact about that is that as family caregivers, women who are providing long-term care are less likely to seek paid help with caregiving as compared to men. In terms of women as long-term care recipients, we know that women live longer than their male counterparts and their male spouses, and are 60% more likely to need long-term care because they live longer and they have chronic conditions that accompany that older age. And because they live longer, they're less likely to have a spouse to care for them. Older women are much more likely than older men to live alone, meaning that they have no one in their household to help them with daily activities. Nearly half, 48% of women aged 75 or older are living alone, compared to less than 1/4 of men. More than 70% of nursing home residents are women. And almost 2/3 of formal paid home care users and informal care recipients are women. And as Kristen said earlier, when we look at the other options for paying for long-term care, like long-term care private insurance, this is often more expensive for women than it is for men because they live longer, because they have more of those chronic conditions that come with older age. And this is why WACARES is so important, because it addresses both the issue of women as long-term care providers and recipients. It levels the playing field by bringing unpaid so-called women's work into a paid profession that people can be proud of, and ensures that women have equal access to affordable long-term care. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the other panelists and discussing some of your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. All right, Maggie, you are up next.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. As I shared earlier, my name is Maggie Humphreys and I work at Moms Rising. We're a national but locally founded grassroots organization organizing moms, caregivers, and families across the state. And I'm really thrilled to be here today because I've seen how long-term caregiving impacts families firsthand. I watched my mom for nearly 10 years walk off her 12-hour shifts to start her second job caring for her mom, who was battling cancer and her dad who was succumbing to Alzheimer's. Without her care, they would not have been able to age but to stay in their own homes, to have their day-to-day needs taken care of. And on top of that, she was raising 2 kids. So I know firsthand how far this benefit will go to support families across our state. And I'm really proud to live in a state that's advancing this. At Moms Rising, addressing the gender gap in caregiving is at the heart of what we do. It's why we fight for workplace protections for pregnant workers. It's why we fight for paid leave so families can be with their families when they need to care for them. And it's why we fight for quality, affordable, and accessible childcare so that children have places to go for care as well. Here in Washington, families have worked hard to champion life-changing reforms that will support and empower the lives of Washington caregivers, who are disproportionately women. And we know that the gender gap for caregivers, like all gender gaps, is also racialized, with the sharpest impacts of the caregiving crisis being experienced by Black, Indigenous, and women of color. As we all know, women make up the majority of unpaid caregiving in their families. We raise children, we clean and cook for family members when they have surgery, we move parents into our own home to help them live out the last years of their lives. And this work adds up to years of lost wages, costs to our own health, and little to no retirement security. So at Moms Rising, we're working with moms and parents and families across the state to build a care infrastructure here in our Washington that meets people where they're at. While our national leaders failed to pass a care infrastructure package, although Moms Rising and others are still hard at work trying to urge them to do so. We've made historic gains here in this Washington with stackable, portable benefits for family caregivers. Benefits like paid family and medical leave that allow workers to take up to 16 weeks of paid leave every year to either care for themselves in a medical event or to care for a family member. And that family member could be related to a worker by blood, but also through chosen family. We're also helping caregivers who take care of our kids with the recently passed Fair Starts for Kids Act, which is the largest state investment in childcare that has ever happened in the state. This bill will go a long way to support families struggling to find affordable and accessible childcare. And it's just the start of addressing that caregiving crisis here in our state. And we've also recently passed the Working Families Tax Credit, which is a new cash payment program that will provide working families across our state with a $1,200 a year payment in addition to their federal tax return. And in fact, one of the expansions our coalition has long identified as a future potential expansion is including unpaid caregivers to the tax credit. There are so many ways that we are starting to build out Washington's caregiving infrastructure, ways that I'm really proud of, and I think we all can be very excited about. And we all still have more work to do to truly ensure that caregivers across our state and families have the support they need. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Maggie. Linnell, we'll go to you next. Oh, Linnell, we've got you still on mute.
Yep. Okay, I think I'm live and almost in person. Do I have it?
Yep, we can.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you so much. I am glad to be with you and give you kind of a slant on this issue from the perspective of the League of Women Voters. We're a nonpartisan organization. We don't support or oppose candidates, but we get quite involved with public policy. This is good public policy. In Washington, we have 20 local leagues with about 2,400 members, all of whom are volunteers. We focus on 3 areas: civic education, how to engage with government and how government works. We wrote and published the textbook, The State We're In, Washington, for middle and high schoolers. With our voter service area, we bring you candidate forums and debates, Vote 411, a comprehensive candidate information service, and summary ballot issues. We translate much of our materials into several languages: Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, Japanese, Russian, to name a few. Our third area of concentration is advocacy. We have about 12 volunteer lobbyists who focus on issues from the environment to government to social and community interests. We only advocate on things we have studied and come to consensus on, and that's usually a 2-year process. We have also trained hundreds, if not thousands, of people on how to advocate with their local and state elected officials. So the reason I can talk to you today about the League of Women Voters of Washington and CARES is that we have a position that says we support human resources action to achieve equal rights for all, action to achieve equality of opportunity for education, employment, and housing, regardless of race, color, gender, national origin, age, sexual orientation, disability, etc. Action to obtain measures that provide basic human needs for those unable to provide for themselves. So this is an equity issue for us, and it is a civic life issue for us. Notice I said volunteers. Many of our volunteers do have the second shift of caregiving. So how that gets translated for us is that we believe civic engagement is important. It's essential for healthy communities. What our position tells us is that after careful consideration and research, the League of Women Voters is committed to supporting equal rights and opportunities. We simply believe that people need to be able to participate. That's what democracy means. We're invested in making democracy work. If you're caretaking, particularly in addition to other responsibilities you have, we, the society, must find a way so that you can participate in democracy. Not just voting, but attending government meetings, going to councils, serving on boards. Government is what helps us decide how we're going to live as a society. There's tremendous concern about polarization right now. And without being able to engage with your neighbors who will be different from you and the people across town, we won't have a democracy. We'll have teams or turfs or tribes focused on winning for their side rather than winning for the community as a whole. We absolutely need the voice of caretakers. And if they can't engage with elected officials, the officials will miss a big part of the community picture, and mistakes and unintended consequences will result. They must engage the caretaker and the cared for. If they don't, that's twice the loss. My point is, caretakers must be able to care for their community as well as their individual. They must have a life that allows for liberty in the pursuit of happiness, or at least the time and energy to be part of something bigger than their own caretaking job, whether it's for a family member or a paid situation. We know that the most unsatisfactory communities to live in, regardless of income, are those with large wage gaps, the wage disparity. And I think CARES tries to address that. This is a country with fabulous wealth. It's about priorities and us choosing how we want to be in community. People need to be in a place where they can participate, period. Of our 2,400 members, as I said, hundreds of them are volunteers and many have caregiving duties. It is always about making it work so government officials hear from citizens. It's simply easier if there is supported caregiving. We have a history, particularly in the West, about whole families falling apart when something happens to mama. We need to keep that top of mind when we're sorting out how should our society ensure family and community health. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and start with some audience Q&A. First, I'm going to answer some of the questions that have come in about the presentation generally and about walk here. So our first question is whether the slides will be available. And the answer is yes. We will have the slides posted on our website at walkcaresfund.wa.gov after the presentation. And we'll have a slide with that web address at the end as well, so that you can take notes. And maybe Julie, you'd be able to drop that in the chat for folks as well. Then a few questions about walk cares. First of all, do all out-of-state employees of Washington-based employers need to apply for exemptions? No, not necessarily. So the standard is whether the employee's work is localized to Washington. So if you live out of state but work entirely in Washington, your work is localized to Washington, and that means that if you're interested in getting an exemption from walk cares, you should look into doing that. The exemptions for that group will become available starting in January 1 of next year. And then for folks who live outside of Washington and their work is performed entirely out of state, but they maybe work for an employer that is headquartered in Washington, that work is not localized in Washington. So they would not be subject to premiums for the program to begin with. Then got a question about the new exemption groups and the January 2023 timeline. That is when the exemption applications for those groups will become available. So if you are in one of those groups, in the workers who are work in Washington but live out of state, spouses of military members, folks who are here on a non-immigrant visa, or veterans with a 70% or higher service-connected disability rating, those groups will be able to apply for an exemption starting in January of next year. And then we got a question about what are the details of the training that a family member would need to complete before getting paid by WACARES. We don't know that yet. That will be part of the program policy development that we will be performing before benefits begin in 2026. So keep an eye out on our website and stay tuned for more on that. And then finally, we have a question about the paperwork or forms that have to be submitted to show that an employee is able to opt out and when. And the answer to that is employees who are interested in an exemption apply for an exemption from the Employment Security Department, and then we'll receive a letter from ESD certifying that they have an exemption, and employees are the ones who are responsible for sharing that letter with employers so that employers do not take premiums out of their paychecks. So that's everything that we've got so far on WACARES. But moving back to our panel, just a few questions. So first of all, I'm interested in hearing from all of you on what resources are available for women or for anyone who's struggling with a heavy load of caregiving responsibilities. Are there any resources you'd highlight?
I don't know if this is a specific resource that I can point to more as in so much as it's a plug for having a union. But if you are an unpaid caregiver, you can be paid for that work. So I think the number one step is for people who are providing unpaid care to figure out if they can actually be paid for that care. And if you are paid for that care, you can become a member of our union. And as a member of our union, you have many benefits, including very affordable health insurance. So I would highly recommend checking out SEIU 775 and all of the many benefits and protections that being a union member can provide.
Adding on to that, and here to more women in unions, I would also, for folks who are caring for a family member who's experiencing a serious medical condition, and that can include a chronic medical condition, paid family leave is a resource for anyone in Washington state who's worked at least 820 hours in the last year. That's about 17 hours a week. So if you're working part-time, if you're working multiple part-time jobs, all those hours add towards qualifying for the program. And you can take up to 12 weeks of paid leave every year to care for a family member. And family member is defined to include chosen family. So if there's someone that you feel you have a responsibility to care for in your life who isn't related to you by blood, this is also a program accessible to you. In addition, the leave can also be used to care for yourself if you're experiencing your own serious health condition. For family caregivers who have childcare needs, the Washington state just massively expanded the number of families who are eligible for subsidized, free and low-cost childcare here in Washington state. So I would highly encourage families to find out if they're newly eligible for this program. It's called the Washington Working Connections Program, and I can include a link in the chat where families can see if they're eligible. This is a great way to have reliable, affordable childcare in your life so that you can take care of yourself and your family's needs. And it also highlight coming next year, families will be able to apply for and receive this new cash payment, the Working Families Tax Credit. So to keep an eye out for that next year as well.
Great. How has the COVID-19 pandemic affected some of these existing inequities that we're talking about in caregiving?
That's a great question, and I can add just a little bit of food for thought there. When we talk about the sandwich generation and women who are caring for loved ones or family members who are elderly or disabled, suddenly they were thrust into the space of having to care for their children due to school closures as well. And we saw many more women leaving the workforce than we did men. And as I mentioned, many of those women have stayed out of the workforce even 2+ years in versus men who are more likely to return to the workforce. And I think, there are so many long-term issues that we don't even realize that is going to cause. I mean, we're talking about a major brain drain in the professional workforce because of women leaving. We're talking about fewer women in positions of leadership, both in business and in government. And I think, as Linnell spoke to, civic participation. So when we talk about universal family care, because women have traditionally been those caregivers, we need those voices in leadership to push for more policies like that. So it's this sort of continuous loop of ensuring that women have the economic and social freedom to participate fully in society.
Absolutely. I am, for one, tired of these clickbait articles about how people, quote, don't want to work anymore. Because the people I talk to, the moms and parents across the state, they desperately want to work and they cannot because they do not have safe places for their kids to go during the day to be cared for, or they have aging family members that they're not able to find care for. The work that and part of why they can't find that care is because the workforce of caregivers has also been so affected. This caregiving work is some of the lowest paid work in our economy, despite being so physically challenging, mentally taxing, and emotionally exhausting. But we don't have to choose to live in a society like that. These are public policy decisions. These are problems that we can solve by investing our dollars into comprehensive solutions. And that also means asking those with resources in our state to pay their fair share in taxes to fund these supports across our country or across our state. COVID-19 has, I think, exacerbated the caregiving gaps that were already there, just like it's exacerbated gaps across our society. But the path ahead is one that we get to choose. And I really hope that we as a state can continue to choose to invest in a caregiving infrastructure that values this essential work.
No, go for it.
I would just like to double down on that because now is the time when elected officials are running for office. So now is the time when you can go to a debate, or you can go to your newspaper and write a letter, or you can do something on Facebook with the candidates to say, how do you feel about, what do you think about, that sort of thing. We are in a decision-making mode, all of us. We've created the society that we live in, and if it doesn't seem like it's very fair, then we can do something to change that. So I just really want to encourage people, now's the time to ask people how they see this unfolding in terms of healthcare. And the other side of the stress of figuring this out. I mean, we are so concerned about PTSD with people coming back from war zones, and it almost seems to me, without getting too dramatic about it, but it seems to me that the PTSD or just the sheer stress and tired feelings that people have during the COVID-19 time is really, I think it's impacting all of us. So another piece, that we're going to pay for it at some point, emergency room, hospitals, that sort of thing. So good citizen stuff.
Absolutely. A couple of you have touched on kind of the low value of care work, or care work being undervalued. What do you think is part of the cause there? What needs to happen for people to better understand and appreciate the value of care work?
Well, to something that Linnell was talking about earlier, I think part of this is putting caregivers at the decision-making table, right? I do a lot of work across the state in my volunteer life, helping support women candidates across running for local and state office. And I remember there was a candidate who had taken a lot of time out of her professional work to care for her children and then her parents. And I was asked by a reporter about how, she was qualified to run, having spent so little time in a professional job. And I think it speaks so, and that was an argument that really resonated in her race. And I think that speaks so much to how little we think of caregiving, when in fact, caregiving is what allows all of us to do our work and to go about our lives. And so really valuing that experience, really valuing that expertise. Part of how we value that is how we pay for it. And it's also how we respect the leadership of caregivers too. And that means electing caregivers to office. That means supporting caregivers and unionizing and their own unions and their own power. It means, enabling caregivers to write policy about caregiving structures and programs in the state. So I think part of how we flip the script is by really empowering the people who are doing this work.
Thank you, Maggie. If we were not virtual, I would be clapping and whistling for everything that you just said. And 775 works a lot on those issues of getting caregivers at the table. I think another piece of that is getting people to understand how they are already caregivers in their own lives and the amount of work that takes. And what I have found in talking with many of our legislative members is that a lot of them have some sort of experience with caregiving in their lives, with long-term caregiving. They have either given care to their parents or their parents-in-law, or they have hired help for those parents and helped them navigate the system. So I think pulling out those stories and getting people to really mine their own personal experience for what this has meant in their life and the difficulty and the stress of that work. And I think also tying this to being a true professional career that is paid well, that people are trained in, and is seen as a healthcare or a healthcare adjacent profession, and not just as, babysitting. So I think those are a couple of ways that we continue to move that needle. And, part of paying caregivers a decent wage is making sure that we have the programs to fund those wages, and WACARES goes a very long way in doing that. I mean, I think as we were talking about this, one thing that always pops into my mind is that we live in this weird paradox where caregivers are not paid enough to afford care, right? They cannot afford their own care if they were to get sick or if their mother were to get sick. I know that personally, after having my kids, when I went back to work, I mean, you sit down and you look at the finances and the numbers of that, and you realize that you're going back to work just to pay for childcare. So we need to get to a place where caregiving is seen as a profession and paid as a profession that they could at least afford their services themselves.
And Linnell, is your hand still up or?
I have more to say. May I?
Yes, love it. Go for it.
I think that what women and many men bring to the table is a way of thinking, not necessarily the content of what you know. And the way of thinking is I have one other person to consider or 20 other people to consider. And the point is we have habitually trained ourselves to think about what's best, what's going to work for everyone. And that's a very different way of thinking than how can I maximize profits? My background is in business, so I can talk about profits and losses and all that sort of thing. So just bear with me. The point is what's going to work for everyone. And that's a very different orientation than how to maximize profit for a shareholder. And that's, I think, one of the things that caregivers bring to the table that is totally different than lots of other people. I will tell you that I was at the end of the life of a woman who met one of the scientists who was involved in the Manhattan Project when they split the atom, and then discovered that maybe there were some unintended consequences like that. And in talking to one of the scientists related with the Manhattan Project, she said to him, "Didn't you think about the waste? Didn't you think about the nuclear waste?" And this is a direct quote. She said, he said, "Waste? We didn't think about waste. We were scientists." And I think that sort of says a lot.
Absolutely. We kind of touched on this a bit, but I'd be interested in hearing more from any of you, maybe Jess, from you. What are the impacts for women who are both professional caregivers and expected to take on a higher proportion of unpaid care in their personal lives?
I mean, I'm just going to be real with you. I don't have like a perfectly canned response for this, but I think that the impact on women is severe, struggling mental health that impacts their family as well. I mean, if you look just at the impact of caregiving alone, much less mixing paid and unpaid caregiving, the impacts to mental health are just absolutely overwhelming. Women need respite care. I think I'm always so stunned by how few people know what respite care is. And so for those of you who don't know, it's essentially a caregiver who will provide support to the primary caregiver so that the primary caregiver can take a break and recharge. So I mean, for me, the biggest thing that we need to talk about is burnout in those instances, how we support with respite care, and how we improve our mental health system to take care of caregivers.
Makes sense. What can people do in their own lives to help either address this inequity or some of the inequitable divisions of labor, or what can people do if they want to get more involved in this?
I think one of the first places people can look is at their own workplace policies. If you're a manager or if you're in leadership at your job, how can you make your own workplace a place that is supportive of caregivers at all stages of caregiving? I think you can also look at how you're supporting caregivers in your own life. If you use childcare, how are you building relationship and showing gratitude to the people who provide care for you and your family? And how are you showing up for them to advocate for their own dignity and wages and workplace protections? And I think for folks who are caregivers in their own life, I think it's so important to find community. We know that caregiving is a crisis, that there are many people experiencing the same thing, and it can feel very isolating, but in fact, there are many others experiencing the same thing at the same time. So finding community can be such a great way to share, to have your experiences validated, and also to potentially find support, to think of solutions together, or just to have a safe space to share what you're going through in a way that validates your own experience.
I would add that just continuing to talk to your elected officials and leaders about the importance of family care and the importance of WA cares. I mean, it seems like a long time away now because we're just in July, but legislative session is going to be on us before you know it. And unfortunately, there has been pushback from people who don't want to pay their fair share into this program. And we need to counter that with voices of real people who are impacted by this, real people who stand to benefit from this program. So it's so important to be involved and to talk to your legislators about why you support WA Cares, to tell them your own story about long-term care in your life so we can make this about real people and not just a tax on the rich.
I just want to amplify that and add, in addition to legislators, talking to candidates as well. It's that time of year to talk to folks who are running for office in your community who want to represent you. And it's important that they know your own experience and your support for this program. In Olympia and the work that we do, there are some incredibly powerful corporate lobbyists and lobbying groups, and it is so important that the voices of working people across the state are amplified too. So just echoing what Jess said, please reach out to your elected officials and to the people who are running to represent you.
I'm going to jump in. There's a lot of talk about cost benefit, and there are many issues that the legislature likes to talk about. Well, what's that going to cost? It is so clear that the cost benefit is on the side of Washington Cares, because if we can keep people in their homes, it's just simply less expensive than to put them in whatever kind of institution there is. So frankly, the balance sheet is on, I'm going to say, our side because of this. I also think you asked, what could someone do? I love that people are talking about asking candidates, bring it up, bring it up. And also, when we talk about people being able to share and come together to maybe share caretaking or share ideas or whatever, I think it's so important that we ask whoever the caregiver is, what do you need? What would work for you? As opposed to doing something that they think would be helpful. I'm always surprised when people try to help me, some of the, what I think crazy things that they come up with, like, no, that's not what I need. What I need is a cup of hot chocolate with 4, count the marshmallows in it. I mean, you just don't know what it is that people need and want. So ask them what would be useful. Thanks.
Absolutely. Okay. Few more questions from the chat. So we've gotten a couple of questions about how caregivers who are paid with WA Cares benefits would, how that system will work. And so the short answer is that the details are still in progress, but essentially caregivers will be able to be employed by either a home care agency or we've gotten a question about Consumer Directive Washington, which is the way that we pay individual providers. So caregivers will be able to be employed and paid through either of those ways. And the WA Cares benefit for the person who's receiving care works like a budget. They get to choose how they use that budget, and then WA Cares will reimburse providers for the care that is provided. We'll pay the providers directly. Then we've also got a question about whether rules were changed in December for exempt folks who are exempt from WA Cares to show proof that they have private long-term care insurance. There have not been any changes to that so far. Folks who have already applied for and been approved for an exemption are still at this point approved and don't have to take any actions. The legislature has asked the LTSS Commission, which is the body that governs WA Cares, to study whether there is whether there are options for requiring folks who do have an exemption based on private long-term care insurance to certify and continue to certify that they have private long-term care insurance. And that's what we've got from the chat for now. Is there anything else? We've got about 5 more minutes before we close. For our panelists, are there other things that you'd want to touch on? Other things that you think are important for folks to know about this topic? All right, where can folks find your organization to learn more?
Our organizations as panelists?
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
We can go around to each of you. Just maybe we can start with you.
Sure, you can learn more about our organization at SEIU775.org. And we also have a WA Cares specific website at walongtermcareoptions.info.
You can learn more about Moms Rising at www.momsrising.org.
For the League of Women Voters, it's www.lwvwa.org. And then we also have a Vote 411 site, which if you put in where you live, you will find out. They're having a little bit of trouble with the redistricting right now, but you will find out, and actually they aren't, the legislature's having trouble with redistricting, but you'll find out all of the ballot issues and candidates that are going to be in your particular ballot. So that's a good place to go look for vote information.
All right, thank you all. We've got a couple more late breaking questions. We've got someone who's asking what happens if you're born after 1968 and you pay into the system for WA Cares for 9 years and then retire, and whether you qualify for benefits. So folks who do not qualify as near retirees for that special near retiree pathway, you can still qualify for WA Cares benefits for early access. So if you need care in the first few years after you stop working, and actually anyone who needs care and has contributed to WA Cares for 3 of the last 6 years at the time that they apply, will still be able to access the full WA Cares benefit. So that is the other option for folks who are not able to earn full lifetime access and who do not qualify for the near retiree pathway. We had a question about whether you need to use up your own savings before you use WA Cares, and no, you do not. So that is one of the great things about WA Cares is that there are no requirements along those lines. You just, as long as you need help with those 3 activities of daily living, and as long as you have met the contribution requirements, you'll be able to use your WA Cares benefits, and to do so without waiting period or meeting any kind of a deductible. So then we've also got someone asking if you don't use your WA Cares benefit before passing away, will your family receive those funds? Nope, that's not the way that WA Cares is structured. It is set up to provide specifically services, benefits that folks need when they need long-term care. So you can think of it as long-term care insurance, essentially. And I think those are all the questions that we are going to get to for today. Thank you all so much for joining us for a recording of this webinar and other resources. You can visit wacaresfund.wa.gov/learn-more. And you can join us in August for our next conversation, which will focus on long-term care planning for near retirees. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining us. We really appreciate hearing from you and hearing your expertise. And thanks to everyone who has joined us this month. We look forward to seeing you next month.